My brother-in-law smiled as he slid the inheritance papers across the table, convinced I would sign them without asking a single question. He thought I was too old, too tired, and too heartbroken to fight back. He was wrong. My name is John Carter, and I am 71 years old. What happened that day took place almost 10 years ago, just 3 days after my older brother was buried. Our family had barely finished mourning when everyone gathered at the lawyer's office to hear the will. My brother-in-law, Daniel, acted like he already knew the outcome. He greeted everyone with a confident smile, shook the lawyer's hand, and kept telling my sister not to worry because everything was already taken care of. Those words stayed in my mind. My brother had spent his entire life building a successful business and collecting valuable farmland. He was an honest man who believed family should always come before money. That was why it felt strange to see Daniel acting more excited than anyone else on the day we were supposed to honor my brother's memory. As the lawyer prepared the documents, I noticed Daniel quietly passing a folder to his attorney. They exchanged a quick look before hiding it beneath the table. Nobody else seemed to notice, but I did. The reading of the will had not even begun. Yet Daniel already looked like a man who believed he had won. I remained silent, watching every move he made. Deep inside, I felt something was terribly wrong. I had trusted Daniel for years, but that morning my instincts told me he was hiding something from the entire family. Then the lawyer cleared his throat, looked around the room, and said words that changed everything. Before I read your brother's final will, there is one document that was delivered late last night. Daniel's confident smile disappeared instantly. The room fell completely silent the moment the lawyer placed the sealed envelope on the table. I looked at Daniel, and for the first time that morning, I saw panic in his eyes. Just seconds earlier, he had been smiling like a man who already owned everything my brother had spent a lifetime building. Now he could not stop staring at that envelope. The lawyer explained that it had been delivered by a private courier the previous evening, with strict instructions that it be opened only after everyone named in the will was present. Daniel suddenly interrupted, insisting the original will should be read first because last-minute documents often create confusion. His voice sounded calm, but I noticed his hands trembling beneath the table. The lawyer ignored him, broke the seal, and began reading. It was a handwritten letter from my brother. He wrote that if anyone attempted to pressure the family, alter documents, or interfere with his final wishes, the lawyer was to immediately stop the proceedings and begin a separate legal review. My brother also mentioned that he had secretly documented every change he made to his estate during the final year of his life because he no longer trusted everyone around him. Those words changed the atmosphere in the room. Family members who had been quietly listening now looked directly at Daniel. He forced a laugh and claimed my brother had become confused before his death. But nobody joined him. Then the lawyer opened another folder that had arrived with the letter. These, he said, are financial records and signed statements. Your brother wanted preserved. Daniel leaned forward, as if trying to see the papers before anyone else. His confidence was gone. Mine was just beginning. I had no idea what those documents contained, but one thing was already clear. My brother had expected someone to try stealing his inheritance, and he had planned for that day long before any of us walked into that office. The lawyer carefully placed the financial records on the table and adjusted his glasses before turning the first page. No one in the room spoke. Even the sound of the air conditioner seemed louder than our breathing. Daniel tried to smile again, but it looked forced. He kept whispering something to his attorney, who suddenly appeared far less confident than before. The lawyer explained that during the last 12 months of my brother's life, every major financial decision had been independently recorded, notarized, and stored in separate locations. My brother had written that he feared someone close to the family was more interested in his money than in his health. Hearing those words sent a chill through the room. Then the lawyer pulled out several bank statements and property transfer requests. Some carried my brother's genuine signature. Others looked similar, but not identical. He paused and quietly said, "There are serious concerns that at least some of these documents may have been forged." My sister gasped and turned toward Daniel. He immediately stood up, slammed his hand on the table, and accused the lawyer of insulting him. He claimed everything had been approved legally and demanded that the reading of the will continue. But the lawyer remained calm. "Mr. Daniel," he said, "these records were reviewed by a forensic document examiner before today's meeting." The room fell silent again. Daniel's face turned pale. I watched him loosen his tie and wipe the sweat from his forehead. For years, I had trusted him as part of our family. Now, I could see a man whose carefully planned story was beginning to collapse. Then the lawyer reached for one final sealed envelope and said, "Before we continue, there is a video message your brother recorded just 3 weeks before he passed away. He instructed me to play it only if anyone challenged the authenticity of these documents." Daniel slowly sat back down. For the first time that day, he looked genuinely afraid. The lawyer connected a small flash drive to the television mounted on the wall. No one moved. Daniel kept staring at the screen, his face completely drained of color. A few seconds later, my brother appeared on the video. He looked weaker than I remembered, but his voice was calm and clear. He looked straight into the camera and said, "If you are watching this, someone has probably tried to change my final wishes." The room froze. My sister covered her mouth, fighting back tears. My brother continued, "I love my family, but I have learned that money can change people. That is why I recorded every important conversation and kept copies of every document in a secure place." Then he held up a folder and said, "If anyone presents papers giving them more than I intended, those papers are not mine." Daniel suddenly stood up and shouted that the video proved nothing. He accused my brother of being manipulated during his final months and demanded the meeting end immediately. But before he could leave, the lawyer calmly handed him another document. "You may want to read this first," he said. It was a forensic report confirming that several signatures submitted during the previous 6 months had not been written by my brother. Daniel's attorney quickly grabbed the report, read the first page, and his expression changed instantly. He quietly whispered something to Daniel, but I could already see the panic in his eyes. The confidence he walked into that office with had completely disappeared. Just then, there was another knock on the conference room door. The lawyer looked toward the entrance and said, "Please come in." 2 detectives stepped inside, showed their badges, and looked directly at Daniel. One of them spoke only a single sentence. "Mr. Daniel, we need to ask you a few questions regarding fraud and forged inheritance documents." I watched Daniel's face change the moment those words were spoken. The man who had entered the room believing he controlled everything suddenly looked like someone who had nowhere left to run. My sister started crying, not because of the inheritance, but because she finally understood that the person she trusted had been hiding the truth from her for years. The detectives asked Daniel to step outside for a private conversation, but before he left, he looked at me with anger in his eyes. "You think you won?" he said quietly. "You have no idea what is coming." Those words stayed in my mind long after he walked away. After the meeting ended, the lawyer explained that my brother had been suspicious for months before his death. He had noticed missing money, unusual transfers, and documents appearing without his knowledge. He never wanted to accuse anyone without proof, especially someone married to his own sister. That was why he spent his final months gathering evidence, instead of creating a family war. As I looked through the documents, I discovered something I never expected. My brother had changed his will not to punish anyone, but to protect the people he loved. He had left a portion of his estate for my sister, another portion for charity, and a special amount for me. I was shocked because I never asked him for anything. When I asked the lawyer why my brother included me, he handed me another letter. The letter began with my name. "John, if you are reading this, then I am no longer here. I know you will wonder why I included you. The answer is simple. You were the only person who helped me without expecting anything in return." I had to stop reading for a moment. My brother knew me better than anyone. But at the bottom of the letter, there was one final sentence that caught my attention. "John, there is something about Daniel that I never told the family, and you need to discover it before it is too late." I looked back at the closed door where Daniel had disappeared. At that moment, I realized the inheritance was not the only secret my brother had left behind. I returned home that evening carrying a box of documents my brother had left behind. But my mind was not focused on the inheritance anymore. The money, the property, and everything else suddenly felt less important than the secret hidden inside that final letter. My brother had always been careful with his words. If he wrote that I needed to discover something about Daniel, then it meant he believed the truth was dangerous. I sat at my kitchen table, opened the letter again, and read the final pages slowly. My brother explained that months before his death, he discovered Daniel had been hiding more than financial problems. Daniel had debts, unpaid loans, and business deals that could destroy everything if they became public. But the most shocking part was that Daniel had been planning to use my sister's inheritance to cover those debts. He did not see my sister as his wife. He saw her as the solution to his problems. I felt sick reading those words. My sister had spent years defending Daniel, believing he was protecting their future. She had no idea he was putting their entire life at risk. The next morning, I called my sister and asked her to meet me privately. When she arrived, I could see the sadness in her eyes. She had spent the night realizing that the man she loved had betrayed her trust. I handed her the documents and watched as she read them. At first, she refused to believe it. She kept saying, Daniel would never do this. But then she saw the bank records, the hidden accounts, and the messages between Daniel and his business partners. Her hands started shaking. She finally whispered, "How long did he plan this?" I did not have an answer. But before we could continue talking, my phone rang. It was the lawyer. His voice sounded serious. He told me there was one more thing my brother had discovered before he died. Something so important that he had refused to put it in writing. He wanted to tell me face to face. I looked at my sister, then at the documents spread across the table. I knew whatever came next would change how I saw Daniel forever. Because my brother had uncovered the one secret Daniel had spent years trying to bury. I arrived at the lawyer's office the next morning, still thinking about everything I had learned. Every new piece of information made Daniel look less like a family member and more like a stranger who had been hiding behind a friendly smile for years. The lawyer closed the door behind me and placed a thick folder on the table. "Your brother wanted you to see this." "Only after the inheritance dispute began," he said. I opened the folder and found copies of emails, business records, and private messages. My hands became cold as I read through them. Daniel had not only planned to take control of the inheritance, he had been preparing for my brother's death long before anyone knew how serious his condition was. He had searched for ways to gain access to accounts, pressured my sister to sign financial documents, and even contacted people who could help him move assets without raising suspicion. But then I saw something that shocked me more than anything else. Daniel had also tried to convince my brother to change his will while he was sick. He told him that the family would be better protected if Daniel managed everything. My brother had secretly recorded that conversation. In the recording, Daniel's voice sounded completely different from the man we knew. He was impatient, demanding, and focused only on money. My brother calmly asked him one question. "Daniel, if there was no inheritance, would you still care about this family?" There was a long silence. Then Daniel answered with words I could never forget. "Everyone needs money to survive." I closed my eyes after hearing that. My brother had not only discovered fraud, he had discovered that someone he trusted had never truly valued the family at all. The lawyer looked at me and said, "Your brother wanted you to understand one thing. He was not trying to protect his wealth. He was trying to protect the people he loved." Before I left, the lawyer handed me one final envelope. He said, "Your brother left this with specific instructions. You are the only person who should open it." I held the envelope in my hands, wondering what could possibly be inside. Then I noticed the handwriting on the front. It was my brother's handwriting, written only days before he passed away. The message contained just 6 words. "John, trust no one after this." I sat in my car outside the lawyer's office for almost 20 minutes, staring at the envelope in my hands. My brother's final words kept repeating in my mind. "Trust no one after this." I had spent my entire life believing family was the one place where a person could feel safe. But now, the person closest to my sister had tried to steal everything my brother worked for. I finally opened the envelope. Inside was a small key and a handwritten note. The note said, "John, this key will lead you to the truth I could not reveal while I was alive." I looked at the key carefully. There was a number engraved on it, 417. I immediately called the lawyer and asked if he knew what it opened. He paused for a moment before answering. "Your brother rented a private storage unit 6 months before his death. He told me nobody should access it unless something happened with the inheritance." My heart started beating faster. I drove directly to the storage facility. When I reached Unit 417, I stood there for a moment, wondering what my brother had hidden away. I inserted the key and opened the door. Inside were boxes filled with old documents, photographs, and recordings. At first, I thought it was only more evidence against Daniel. But then I found a folder with my sister's name written on it. I opened it slowly and froze. Inside were copies of messages between Daniel and another person. Someone I recognized, someone from our own family. My stomach tightened as I continued reading. Daniel had not been working alone. He had another person helping him plan everything. The person who helped him knew every detail about my brother's health, his finances, and the inheritance. I looked at the photographs inside the folder and realized my brother had been watching this betrayal unfold for months. He knew something was wrong. but he was waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. Just then, my phone started ringing. It was an unknown number. I answered, and a nervous voice said, "John, you need to leave that storage unit immediately." I asked who was calling, but before they answered, the line went silent. I looked around the empty hallway, holding the phone tightly. For the first time, I realized this was no longer just about an inheritance. Someone was willing to do anything to keep my brother's final secret hidden. I looked around the storage facility, expecting someone to appear, but the hallway remained completely empty. The warning call kept replaying in my mind. Whoever had contacted me knew exactly where I was and what I had found. That meant someone was watching me. I quickly gathered the documents from the box and locked the storage unit again. I did not want to stay there any longer. On the drive home, I kept thinking about the folder with my sister's name on it. I had spent years believing Daniel was the only person capable of this betrayal, but now I was not sure anymore. My brother had discovered something much bigger than I imagined. When I reached home, I called my sister immediately and asked her to come over alone. When she arrived, I placed the documents on the table and watched her reaction. At first, she looked confused. Then she saw Daniel's messages and her expression changed. She covered her mouth with her hand and whispered, "I know that person." My heart sank. I asked her who it was, but she stayed silent for several seconds. Finally, she looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "It is someone we have trusted for years." Before she could say the name, there was a loud knock at the door. We both froze. Nobody knew we were looking into this. I walked slowly toward the entrance and looked through the window. Daniel was standing outside. I opened the door but did not let him inside. He looked different from the confident man I saw days earlier. He looked desperate. "John, we need to talk," he said. I stared at him and replied, "You have already said enough." But Daniel lowered his voice and said something I never expected. "I know what your brother left you, and if you open that final file, you will destroy someone you love." Those words stopped me. For a moment, I wondered if Daniel was trying to scare me, or if he was finally telling the truth. Then my sister walked behind me and whispered, "John, do not believe him." I turned around and saw fear in her eyes. That was the moment. I realized the biggest secret my brother discovered was not about money. It was about the people closest to us. I looked at Daniel standing outside my door, and for the first time, I saw something I had never seen before in him. Fear. The man who had walked into the lawyer's office believing he could control everything was now standing in front of me, desperate to stop me from finding the truth. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. "You have one chance to explain yourself," I said. Daniel looked down for a moment before speaking. "John, I made mistakes. I will admit that. But your brother was not as innocent as you think." I almost laughed. After everything I had discovered, hearing him blame my brother felt unbelievable. "You tried to steal his inheritance," I said. "You forged documents and lied to your own wife." His face became tense. "You do not know the whole story." Those words caught my attention. I asked him what he meant. Daniel looked toward the house and lowered his voice. "Your brother discovered something about your family years ago. Something he never told anyone because he was trying to protect you." I felt a strange feeling in my chest. It was the same feeling I had when I read my brother's final letter. There was still another secret. "What secret?" I asked. Daniel hesitated. "I cannot tell you here." I told him I was done with games. But he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "Your brother gave this to me before he died." My heart stopped for a second. "Why would he give anything to you?" Daniel looked away and said, "Because he knew I was not the only person hiding something." I took the envelope from his hand but did not open it. I wanted answers, but I also knew Daniel had spent years manipulating people. When I went back inside, my sister was waiting. She looked at the envelope and immediately became nervous. "Where did you get that?" she asked. The fear in her voice told me more than words ever could. I slowly placed the envelope on the table and said, "I think it is time everyone tells the truth." I opened it carefully, and inside was a single photograph. The moment I saw it, I felt the room spinning. It was a picture from 30 years ago, and standing beside my brother was someone I never expected to see. It was someone from my own past, someone I thought was gone forever. I stared at the photograph for what felt like hours, even though only a few seconds had passed. My hands became weak as I held the old picture closer. The person standing beside my brother was someone I never expected to see again. It was my childhood friend Michael, a man I believed had disappeared from my life more than 30 years ago. I looked at my sister, but she could not meet my eyes. That was when I knew she already knew about this secret. "Why is Michael in this picture?" I asked. Nobody answered. The silence was heavier than any words. Finally, my sister sat down and whispered, "Because Michael came back into our lives years ago." I felt betrayed all over again. Not because of money this time, but because the people I trusted had been carrying secrets around me for years. She explained that Michael had contacted my brother after discovering something important about our family's past. Something connected to a business deal, old documents, and a mistake that had affected all of us decades earlier. My brother had been investigating it quietly because he believed someone had intentionally hidden the truth from our family. Then I looked at Daniel. Suddenly, everything made sense. The inheritance was never just about money. Daniel had been afraid because the documents my brother left behind could expose everything he had been trying to hide. The lawyer's warnings, the storage unit, the secret recordings. They were all pieces of a much bigger puzzle. I opened the final file my brother left behind. Inside were pages of notes written in his handwriting. At the top of the first page were words that made my heart race. "The person who tries to steal my inheritance is not doing it for the money. They are trying to hide what happened 30 years ago." I kept reading, and every sentence revealed another shocking detail. My brother had discovered that Daniel was connected to a hidden financial scheme from years earlier. But there was one final line that made me stop breathing. "John, I am sorry I never told you the truth about what happened. The night our father died," I closed the file slowly. My brother had spent his final days trying to protect me from a secret that went back to our childhood. And now, after all these years, I was finally about to learn the truth. I sat at the table holding my brother's final notes, but I was afraid to turn the next page. For most of my life, I believed I knew my family. I believed I knew my brother, my sister, and the people who stood beside me through every difficult moment. But now I realized there were chapters of our lives that had been hidden from me. I slowly continued reading. My brother explained that 30 years earlier, after our father passed away, there was a disagreement over a small piece of land that had belonged to our family. At the time, everyone thought it was just a misunderstanding between relatives. But my brother discovered years later that important documents had been secretly changed, and someone had benefited from that mistake. The person responsible had spent decades making sure the truth never came out. My hands tightened around the paper as I read the next sentence. My brother wrote that Daniel had recently discovered those old records and realized the truth could destroy him. That was why he wanted control of the inheritance. He was not only trying to take money, he was trying to find and destroy any evidence that could connect him to the past. I looked at my sister, who was sitting quietly across from me. She finally admitted that she knew something was wrong years ago, but was too afraid to ask questions. She had spent years protecting a man who had never protected her. At that moment, I understood why my brother had left everything in such a careful way. He knew the truth would hurt people, but he also knew lies could destroy an entire family. The next morning, we returned to the lawyer's office with all the evidence. Daniel was already there. He looked tired, but he was still trying to appear confident. When the lawyer placed the documents on the table, Daniel's expression changed. "You found everything," he whispered. The lawyer looked at him and said, "Your plan failed because you underestimated one thing. Your brother knew you better than you knew yourself." Daniel remained silent. For the first time, he had nothing to say. But before the meeting ended, the lawyer received a phone call. After listening for a few seconds, his face became serious. He looked at me and said, "John, there is one more person involved. Someone we never expected." I felt a chill go through me. After everything we had uncovered, I thought there could not be another surprise. I was wrong. The biggest betrayal was still waiting to be revealed. I looked at the lawyer, waiting for him to explain who else was involved. After everything I had discovered, I thought I was prepared for any truth. But when he finally said the name, my heart sank. It was Michael, the same man I had seen standing beside my brother in that old photograph. The person I thought had returned to help us was actually connected to the secret my brother had been trying to uncover. For a moment I felt lost. I did not know who to trust anymore. The lawyer explained that Michael had provided some information to my brother, but he had also hidden important details. He knew more about the old family documents than he admitted. My brother had started investigating him near the end of his life because he believed Michael was protecting someone. I looked at the evidence again and noticed something I had missed before. There were several payments made from Daniel's accounts to another person. The name was hidden under a company record, but after a deeper look, We discovered the company belonged to Michael. The connection was finally clear. Daniel and Michael had not been enemies. They had been working together. Their plan was simple. Daniel would gain control of the inheritance, while Michael would help remove any evidence connected to the old family secret. They believed my brother would never expose them because he was too sick and too weak. They were wrong. My brother had spent his final months preparing for the exact moment when they would try to take everything. When Daniel realized the truth was coming out, he tried to leave the office. But this time, he could not escape. The lawyer had already contacted the authorities with all the evidence. As Daniel walked past me, he stopped and looked at me. "You think you won, John? You lost your brother. You lost your trust in your family. Nothing will ever be the same." I looked at him and calmly replied, "You are right. Nothing will ever be the same. But at least now I know the truth." Watching him leave, I finally understood my brother's final lesson. An inheritance is not measured by money or property. The greatest thing a person can leave behind is the truth. But as I returned home that evening, I found one last letter waiting for me. A letter my brother had written, but never sent. And the first line made my hands shake. "John, if you have found this letter, then there is one final thing you need to know about me." I held my brother's final letter in my hands and sat quietly for several minutes before opening it. After everything I had learned, I was afraid of what another secret could do to my heart. But this was my brother, the man who had protected me my entire life. I knew I owed it to him to hear the truth until the very end. I opened the letter and began reading. "John, if you are reading this, then you already know that the people we trust the most can sometimes hide the deepest secrets. But I do not want you to remember me because of the betrayal we uncovered. I want you to remember the years when our family stood together." I paused for a moment, feeling tears in my eyes. My brother continued, "I knew Daniel would eventually try to take what was never his, but I also knew that anger would destroy you more than his actions ever could. Do not let what happened turn your heart cold." Those words felt like he was sitting beside me, giving me advice one final time. He explained that the reason he kept everything hidden was not because he wanted revenge. He wanted to protect the people he loved and give them a chance to choose the truth. He also wrote that the inheritance was never about the money. The real inheritance was the lesson he wanted to leave behind. Trust should be earned, but forgiveness should never be impossible. Months later, my sister finally started rebuilding her life without Daniel. She admitted that losing the marriage hurt, but losing the illusion of who he was hurt even more. She thanked me for helping her discover the truth before it was too late. As for me, I kept my brother's words close to my heart. The money he left me changed some things, but it did not bring him back. What mattered most was knowing that even in his final days, he was still trying to protect his family. Looking back now, I realized that Daniel thought stealing an inheritance would make him powerful. He believed money could control everything. But he never understood something my brother knew all along. A person's true wealth is not found in bank accounts or property. It is found in the people who stand beside you when everything falls apart. That day, my brother-in-law tried to steal my inheritance. But in the end, he lost something far more valuable. He lost the trust of everyone who ever believed in him. And I gained the one thing my brother wanted me to have all along: the truth. 10 years have passed since the day my brother's final wishes were revealed. But some memories never leave you. They stay with you because they changed the person you became. I still remember sitting in that lawyer's office, watching a man I trusted try to take something that was never his. At that moment, I thought I was fighting for an inheritance. But later, I realized I was fighting for something much more important. I was fighting for the truth my brother wanted to protect. After all the evidence came forward, Daniel could no longer hide behind his lies. The legal process took months, but eventually, everything was exposed. The forged documents, the hidden plans, and the people involved were all revealed. Daniel lost the inheritance he tried to steal, but the biggest loss was something money could never replace. He lost the trust of the people who once considered him family. My sister's life changed forever after that. She spent years believing she knew the man she married, only to discover a completely different person behind that familiar face. It was painful for her, but slowly, she rebuilt her life. One evening, she told me something I never forgot. She said, "John, I thought losing Daniel would break me, but the truth helped me find myself again." Those words made me realize that sometimes the truth hurts because it destroys the life we imagined. But living inside a beautiful lie can hurt even more. I kept my brother's final letter with me all these years. I read it whenever I need to remember what truly matters. His final message was not about wealth, revenge, or punishment. It was about choosing kindness even after being hurt. He knew betrayal could make a person angry, but he did not want anger to control the rest of my life. The inheritance my brother left me changed some things, but it never filled the empty space his death created. What mattered most was knowing that even in his final days, he was still thinking about protecting the people he loved. I often visit the old family land that my brother worked so hard to preserve. I stand there quietly and remember the lessons he left behind. He taught me that a person's true value is not measured by what they leave behind in a bank account. It is measured by the love, honesty, and memories they leave in the hearts of others. That day, my brother-in-law tried to steal my inheritance. He believed money would give him power over everyone around him. But he learned a lesson he never expected. You can steal money. You can steal property. You can even steal someone's trust for a while. But you can never steal the truth. And after everything I lost, everything I discovered, and everything I survived, I realized my brother had given me the greatest inheritance of all. Not wealth, not possessions, but the truth.